My name is Valentina Cruz, and before I tell you what happened at my 30th anniversary dinner, you need to understand who I was before that night. Because the woman I walked into that restaurant as and the woman I walked out as were two entirely different people. I was raised by a mother who ironed her grief into her blouses and a father who believed silence was strength. I grew up in a brick row house in South Philly where the neighbors knew your business before you did, and the church ladies prayed over you with one eye open. I was sharp, I was hungry, and I was determined to become something no one in my zip code had ever seen. By 22, I had a marketing degree from Temple University. By 28, I had co-founded a brand consulting firm in Center City that worked with luxury real estate developers, hospitality groups, and high net worth clients who wanted their image to look like old money even when it wasn't. By 30, I had married Desmond Fairfield, brilliant, gorgeous, third-generation real estate money from Atlanta, and we had built a life so beautiful it looked fictional. Custom townhouse in Rittenhouse Square, a summer place in Martha's Vineyard, closets that looked like retail floors, gala invitations on the refrigerator the way other families pinned report cards. People looked at us and saw a love story. I looked at us and thought the same thing, for 29 years and 364 days. Then came the anniversary dinner, and the boy, and the woman, and the truth that rewrote every single chapter I thought I'd already lived. Let me start from the beginning. Desmond had insisted on planning the whole thing himself. 30 years, Valentina, he'd said, smoothing my hair back the way he always did when he was being tender. Let me do something for you for once. He'd reserved a private dining room at Lorne's, the kind of Philadelphia restaurant where the lighting is designed by an architect and the sommelier speaks 4 languages and a 6-course tasting menu runs $800 a head before wine. He said it would be intimate, just us, maybe a few of our closest friends surprising us at the end. He looked so proud of himself when he said it. I remember thinking, God, I still love this man. Even after everything, the long stretches when work consumed him, the 2 miscarriages I had in my 30s that we never really talked about enough, the slow erosion of passion that any long marriage knows, I still looked at Desmond and felt something real, something mine. I wore a black Valentino column gown and the diamond drop earrings he'd given me for our 20th. My hair was blown out, my nails were a deep Bordeaux. I looked like what I was, a successful woman celebrating a milestone, and I felt it too, right up until I walked into that private dining room and saw that it was not just us. There were 2 other people at the table. A young man, maybe 26, 27, broad through the shoulders like Desmond, same jaw, same particular way of holding his wine glass with 3 fingers instead of 2. He stood when I walked in, and the politeness of it almost made it worse, because I could see Desmond in every inch of him, and my stomach dropped before my brain had even caught up to what my eyes were telling me. And beside him, her, Rochelle Tatum. I hadn't seen Rochelle Tatum in 22 years. Last time was at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in Atlanta when Desmond and I were newly married, maybe year 2 of our life together. She'd been Desmond's ex, significant ex, the kind of ex a woman can sense in her husband's body language when her name comes up, a slight tension in the shoulders, a micro pause before the response, the way the air thickens just slightly around a story he's told before. I knew they dated seriously for about 3 years before Desmond and I met. I knew she'd wanted more from him than he'd given her. What I didn't know, what I was about to learn at my own anniversary dinner, which had apparently been repurposed without my knowledge into something else entirely, was that she had apparently given him a son. I stood in the doorway. Nobody spoke for about 4 seconds, which felt like 4 hours. Then Desmond said, Val, come in. Sit down. I can explain. And I thought, can you? Because I am looking at your face, and I am looking at that boy's face, and I don't think you can explain this in any language that makes sense. I sat down. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I should have turned around. You're thinking I should have taken off one of those diamond earrings and placed it ceremonially in my wine glass and walked out. That's what the movies would do. That's what a woman with nothing to lose would do. But here's the thing about women who built something from nothing. We don't perform our pain. We manage it. We sit down, we pour our own wine, we listen with our faces completely under control while the entire foundation of our life is being quietly detonated beneath us. And we start thinking. Oh, I was thinking. His name was Brennan. Brennan Taddon Fairfield, as it turned out. Rochelle said it like a correction, like a reclamation. She said, I always told Brennan he had a right to know his father. She said it to me, not to Desmond, to me. Her voice was warm in that particular way that women who have practiced their cruelty use warmth as a delivery mechanism. She was wearing a caramel-colored blazer and chandelier earrings, and she'd aged beautifully, which I resented in that specific way you resent something that has absolutely no bearing on the actual issue, but registers anyway. Desmond said he'd found out about Brennan only 8 months ago, said Rochelle had reached out through a mutual contact, said he'd been trying to figure out how to tell me, said he thought maybe bringing everyone together on an occasion that already meant something might, and this is the word he used, soften it. Soften it. I picked up my wine glass. I said, How old are you, Brennan? He looked at me like he wasn't sure I was safe. Smart boy. He said, 27. 27. Year 3 of my marriage, the year I had decorated our first home, the year I had thrown Desmond a surprise birthday party for his 35th and invited 40 people and made a slideshow of our first 2 years together. The year I had started to feel, for the first time in my adult life, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I looked at Rochelle. She looked back at me with something I can only describe as satisfaction dressed up as remorse. And that right there was when I understood that this dinner wasn't about Brennan knowing his father. This was theater. This had been staged. Rochelle had waited 27 years, and she had chosen this night deliberately. She had chosen the venue. I'd bet money on it. She had probably suggested the private dining room. She had probably coached Desmond on the word soften. She had waited until I had 30 years of my life invested, a home, a brand, an identity, and she had decided that tonight was the night she'd make sure I knew that a piece of my marriage had never been mine. That was when I remembered what she'd said to me at that birthday dinner in Atlanta, year 2 of my marriage. She'd been drinking and she'd found me alone by the bar and she'd leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, something heavy, something floral, and she'd said, with that same warm voice, I hope you two are happy, I really do, though I'll tell you, honey, God has a way of balancing out what isn't meant to be. She'd smiled. I've been praying for y'all. And then she'd walked away and I had stood there wondering if I'd just been threatened or blessed. I decided then that it was just bitterness, grief dressed up as prophecy. I'd put it down and never picked it back up. I was picking it back up now. God has a way of balancing out what isn't meant to be. She hadn't been grieving, she'd been planting. I set my wine glass down very carefully. I smoothed the napkin across my lap. I looked at Desmond, really looked at him, and saw a man who was, at his core, a coward who'd wrapped his cowardice in enough charm and enough zeros on enough checks that he'd never had to fully reckon with anything he'd done. He loved me, I believe that, but love had never been enough to make Desmond brave. I said, very calmly, Brennan, it is nice to meet you. I hope you understand that none of this is your fault. Brennan blinked. He nodded. He looked relieved and confused at the same time. I said, Desmond, I'm going to need you to give me a moment alone with Rochelle. Rochelle's left eyebrow went up about a millimeter, just enough for me to clock it. Desmond said, Val. I said, it wasn't a question, sweetheart. He took Brennan and they went to the bar. I watched them go. Father and son walking side by side for maybe the first time, and even in that moment, even with everything, I felt something complicated and human about it that I filed away to feel later when I wasn't busy. Then I turned to Rochelle. She folded her hands on the table, composed, ready. She'd been waiting for this moment for 27 years, and she was ready for it. I said, "You picked tonight on purpose." She said, "Desmond chose tonight." I said, "Desmond chose the restaurant. You chose tonight. You reached out 8 months ago. You could have done it any time in the last 27 years. You chose the anniversary." She looked at me, and the warmth dropped about 3 degrees, and I saw her, the real her, for just a second before she pulled it back. She said, "I thought it was important for family to come together." I said, "I know what you thought." She tilted her head. "Valentina, I understand this is hard." I said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly, not as a threat, as a promise." I folded my own hands, mirrored her posture. I built this life. Every asset, every contact, every account that Desmond Fairfield has in this city has my fingerprints on it. His last 4 development deals, my firm managed the brand positioning. His investor relationships, half of them came through my network. The Fairfield name in Philadelphia means what it means because of the last 15 years of my work. So when you calculate it tonight, and you did calculate it, I respect that, I really do, you forgot to calculate me. She said slowly, "Is that a threat?" I said, "It's a map. I'm telling you where we are so you can make good decisions going forward." There was a pause. I said, "Now, here's what's going to happen. Brennan is going to have a relationship with his father. That's right, and that's fair, and I have no issue with that child. But you are going to stay in your lane, which is Atlanta, which is wherever Desmond sends support, which is not my dinner table and not my life and not my husband's ear." I paused. "And if I ever find out that you have been advising Desmond on anything, on our finances, on our home, on any decision that affects my life, I will light up every business interest you have in Georgia with a phone call and a press release, and you will spend the next 5 years explaining yourself to people who have very long memories." I smiled, warm, broad, the smile I use when I close a deal. I've been in brand management for 23 years, Rochelle. I know exactly how to build a reputation, and I know exactly how to burn one down. The color shifted in her face. I said, "Enjoy the amuse-bouche." I stood up, smoothed my gown, and went to the bar where my husband and his son were standing in that careful, stilted way of 2 people who share DNA and nothing else yet. And I said to Desmond, quietly, "We are going to have the longest conversation of our marriage tonight when we get home. But right now, for the next 2 hours, we are going to sit at that table and have dinner because I refuse to let this woman watch me fall apart." Desmond looked at me like I was something he didn't fully deserve. He was right. We had dinner. I asked Brennan about his life. He was an architect. Irony so thick you could choke on it. Desmond's whole empire was buildings, and here was his son designing them. He was from Atlanta, had gone to Georgia Tech, had a girlfriend named Petra, and a rescue dog in an apartment in Midtown that he paid for himself. He was clearly nervous and clearly decent, and I made a point of asking him real questions and listening to real answers, because he was an innocent person in a web that the adults around him had spun, and I was not going to take my anger out on him. Rochelle barely touched her food. Good. Desmond tried twice to reach for my hand under the table. The first time, I let him. The second time, I moved my hand to my wine glass. When dinner was over, I said goodbye to Brennan with genuine warmth. I said, "I hope we can get to know each other under better circumstances." He said, "Me too, Mrs. Fairfield." And that right there, that still got to me. Mrs. Fairfield, my name, my 30 years. In the car on the way home, Desmond tried to talk, and I said, "Not yet." He drove. We got home. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, the good stuff, the pappy we kept for clients, and I sat down on the living room sofa in my Valentino gown, and I said, "Start from the beginning and do not leave a single thing out." He talked for 2 hours. The Cliff's Notes, he and Rochelle had slept together once after we were married, once. Year 3, a conference in Atlanta he'd attended without me. He said he'd been struggling, that we'd had a hard stretch I barely remembered now, some tension around money and my firm taking off, and him feeling sidelined in his own success story. He said it was wrong, and he knew it was wrong, and he had ended it immediately and told himself it was contained. He didn't know about Brennan until Rochelle's email 8 months ago with a DNA test attached. He'd spent those 8 months trying to figure out how to be a man about it, and apparently had concluded that ambushing me at my anniversary dinner was the answer. I listened to all of it. When he was done, I said, "Here is what I know. You cheated, you had a son, you kept both secrets for 27 years, even after you knew, because you were scared of what I do. And you let Rochelle engineer this reveal because you were too much of a coward to do it yourself." He said, "Val," I said, "I'm not done." I set my bourbon down. "Here is what's going to happen. You are going to establish a legal relationship with Brennan with full financial support and whatever involvement he wants, because that child did nothing wrong. You are going to find a therapist for yourself and for us within the week, and you are going to understand something clearly." I leaned forward. "I am not leaving you tonight, not because I'm weak, not because I don't have options, because 30 years is a real thing, and I am not going to let Rochelle Tatum have the satisfaction of watching this marriage end on her timeline." I paused. "But make no mistake, Desmond, I am not the same woman I was when I walked into that restaurant. You will spend the rest of this marriage earning back something you don't deserve to get back easily, and I am going to need you to be big enough to accept that." He cried. Desmond Fairfield, who I had seen cry maybe twice in 30 years, sat on our Italian wool sofa in his dinner jacket and cried. I let him. That was 6 months ago. Here is what happened after. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Ingrid Sorley, black woman, 60s, practiced in Center City, worked with high net worth couples who'd been through exactly this kind of complicated wreckage. She had a habit of saying, "What do you actually want, not what you think you're supposed to want," the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, precisely and in places that hurt. She was the best thing to happen to us in a decade. Desmond kept his sessions every Thursday, rain or shine. Brennan came to Philadelphia for a weekend in December. Desmond took him to a Sixers game and to see a building that was going up on the waterfront that his firm had developed. I had them over for Sunday dinner. I made my mother's sofrito rice and roasted chicken, and Brennan ate 2 plates and helped me with the dishes and told me about a project he was designing in Savannah. And I thought, this kid is good. Whatever sins his parents committed, he came out good. That doesn't mean I forgave his mother. Let me tell you what I did about Rochelle Tatum, because this is the part I need you to understand. I am not a vindictive woman by nature, but I am a strategic one, and Rochelle had spent 27 years positioning herself for a moment that she believed would destabilize me. She had waited until my foundation was load-bearing, and then she'd tried to pull a beam. She had done it with a smile and a caramel blazer and a boy who deserved better than to be weaponized. I was not going to match her energy. I was going to exceed her calculation. About 3 weeks after the dinner, I had my assistant pull everything publicly available on Rochelle Tatum's professional life. She ran a luxury event planning company in Atlanta called Tatum Collective. Upscale clientele, corporate retreats, charity galas, society weddings, good reputation, strong social following. She'd built it over 15 years, and it was legitimately impressive. I gave her credit for that, privately, before I got to work. Here's the thing about brand consulting at the level I operate. You know everyone. I have spent 23 years building relationships with editors, publicists, venue directors, catering directors, real estate developers, hospitality executives, and the kinds of people who get asked to recommend vendors at the top of the market. I am in 8 group texts that shape which firms get recommended for the biggest events in the Northeast. I am a board member at 2 arts institutions that hold galas every spring that hire event planners. I made 3 phone calls, not threatening calls, not "don't work with this woman" calls, just calls. The kind where you mention, in passing, that you've had a complicated personal experience with someone's professional judgment and that you'd hate for a colleague to encounter the same thing. The kind of call that plants a question without issuing a verdict. 2 months later, Tatum Collective lost their biggest recurring account, a pharmaceutical company that held an annual gala in New York that generated about $300,000 in revenue for Rochelle's business. The pharmaceutical company's communications director was a woman I'd had lunch with 4 times a year for the last decade. I didn't ask her to drop Rochelle. I simply had lunch. Then, I did something more interesting. There was a feature piece being developed by a Philadelphia lifestyle publication called Meridian Magazine, a spread on women who'd built luxury brands from scratch. They'd reached out to me about participating. I said yes. And then I mentioned, casually, that there was a woman in Atlanta named Rochelle Tatum who had a compelling story as well. I said it magnanimously. I said it like I was being generous. The writer reached out to Rochelle, and Rochelle, who had no idea who had referred her, said yes immediately. She gave an interview, she talked about her business and her son and her personal life. And in that interview, when asked about challenges she'd faced, she said, in print, something very close to, "I had a relationship years ago with someone who went on to be very successful. There were complications, but I believe everything happens for a reason." The complications, in print. The journalist, being a journalist, followed up, asked for clarity. Rochelle, smelling a profile, said more than she should have. Not specifics, but enough. When the piece ran, Desmond's name wasn't in it. Neither was mine, but Philadelphia is a city of about 4 degrees of separation at our social level, and anyone who knew us, and plenty of people did, read that piece and connected dots. Rochelle had wanted the story told. Fine, I let her tell it. I just arranged the venue. Within the week, 3 of Rochelle's Philadelphia area contacts, people she'd been cultivating for years as potential expansion clients, reached out to her to say they'd be taking their business in a different direction. One of them sent a note that said she didn't think they were aligned professionally. Professionally. Lovely word. I heard about this through the grapevine. I did not gloat. Gloating is for people who are still afraid. 6 months later, Desmond and I renewed our vows. Small, private. Dr. Sorley was there, which she said was unusual, but she made an exception. Brennan was there, which felt right in a way I hadn't expected. Desmond's brother flew in from Houston. My sister came up from Baltimore with her kids. We did it in the garden of the Martha's Vineyard house on a Thursday afternoon in late September, with the light doing that specific October-adjacent thing where everything looks saturated and golden and real. Desmond wrote his own vows. I will not share them here because they belong to me. What I will tell you is that he said my name the way he said it when we were 29 and newly married and standing in the first apartment we'd ever shared. Like it meant something, like it was specific, like there was no other name in the world that started that particular sentence. And I held his hand and I thought, this is not naive. This is not forgiveness without teeth. This is a choice. Every day from now on is a choice, and I am choosing this man, this rebuilt thing, this hard-won, complicated, true thing with my eyes open. That is different from the blind thing I had before. That is better, even though it costs more. The last thing I'll tell you about Rochelle. About 2 months after our renewal, I got a message from her, sent to my business email, which meant she'd had to look it up. The message was 2 sentences. It said, "I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again." I read it twice. Then I archived it. Not deleted, archived. Because I am a woman who keeps receipts. I did not respond. There was nothing to say. She had thrown a stone into the water and she'd watched the ripples go out in directions she hadn't planned for, and she'd had the self-awareness to acknowledge it. That's more than most people manage. I was not interested in punishing her further. I was interested in living my life so well that she became irrelevant, which is the most elegant revenge there is. My name is Valentina Cruz Fairfield. I grew up in a brick row house in South Philly. I built my business from a folding table in a studio apartment. I married a brilliant, flawed, real man, and I spent 30 years building something with him that survived a thing that kills most marriages. I have a son-in-law by surprise who makes good architecture and eats 2 plates of sofrito rice. I have a therapist I see every other Tuesday. I have a marriage that has scar tissue in it, which means it also has history, which means it also has truth. I did not storm out of that restaurant. I sat down. I poured my own wine. I thought. And then, methodically, with no violence and no noise and no scene, I dismantled every advantage my adversary thought she had. And I did it while wearing Valentino and smiling across a dinner table and asking a 27-year-old boy what kind of architecture he loved most. He said he loved buildings that looked simple from the outside, but were structurally complex underneath, designed to hold more weight than they showed. I said, "Me too, baby. Me too."